The silence in this house is a living thing. It breathes in the dust motes dancing in the afternoon sun and settles, heavy and thick, on the velvet armchair where my husband, Robert, used to sit. The fabric is worn smooth in the exact shape of him, a ghost impressed upon the furniture. But the loudest silence of all, the one that screams until my ears ring, comes from the small black rectangle of my phone, lying dark on the polished oak of the dining table. I gave my son, Michael, everything I had, every last scrap of my soul, and now, at 42 years old, he won't even return my calls. Comment on which city you're watching and subscribe to the channel because I guarantee there's more to this story than meets the eye. It's been 6 weeks. 43 days of dialing his number, my thumb hovering over his picture, that handsome face, so much like his father's, frozen in a moment of laughter I can no longer imagine, only to be sent to the sterile, impersonal greeting of his voicemail. You've reached Michael. Please leave a message. I've left dozens. Pleading, angry, confused, heartbroken messages that float away into an electronic void, unanswered. The first week, I was frantic. The second, I was furious. Now, a cold, creeping dread has settled in my bones. The cruelty of it is a physical ache, a constant pressure behind my ribs that makes it hard to draw a full breath. How can a child you nurtured from a helpless infant, whose every fever you soothed and every scraped knee you kissed, simply erase you from their life? I walk through the rooms of our family home, my hand trailing along the cool, painted walls as if I can absorb some memory of a time when this place was filled with noise and laughter. The air itself feels thin, stripped of the vibrancy it once held. Here is the height chart, penciled onto the doorframe of the pantry, tracking Michael's growth from a wobbly toddler to a young man who had to stoop to kiss my cheek. I trace the highest line, dated on his 18th birthday, my own handwriting now faded and frail. There, on the mantelpiece, is the silver-framed photo of his college graduation, his arms slung around my shoulders, both of us beaming with a light that seems impossible now. I look at the woman in that picture, her eyes so full of pride and a naive, blinding joy, and I don't recognize her anymore. I was a mother then, a pillar, a force. What am I now? Just an old woman in an empty house, haunted by the ghost of a son who is still alive. Something is terribly, fundamentally wrong, and the not knowing is a cancer, eating me alive from the inside out. The first sign, the one I willfully dismissed as an oversight, a casualty of a busy life, was my birthday. 72. A number that felt significant, deserving of acknowledgement. I spent the day waiting, manufacturing cheerfulness. I baked my own cake, a small lemon bun, his favorite since he was a boy. The scent of citrus and vanilla filled the kitchen, a cruel mockery of celebrations past. I set 2 plates at the table, a fork and a napkin at each, just in case he decided to surprise me. The sun set, painting the kitchen walls in melancholy shades of orange and purple, and the phone never rang. The second plate on the table went from hopeful to pathetic, then finally to insulting. Not a call, not a text, not even a card in the mail from him, his wife Sarah, or my precious granddaughter, Lily. Sarah had always been so thoughtful, her cards arriving a week early. For her to forget. It wasn't possible. This wasn't forgetfulness. This was a statement. This was a door being slammed shut, the deadbolt thrown, and I was on the wrong side of it, shivering in the cold. That night, I threw the second piece of cake, plate and all, into the trash. The clatter of the ceramic breaking was the loudest sound the house had heard in days. I think back, sifting through our last conversations like an archaeologist examining ancient fragments, searching for a clue, a misstep, a word I said that could have caused this cataclysm. The last time I heard his voice was 2 months ago. He'd called to check in, the way he always did on a Sunday evening, a ritual as sacred as church. It was a normal call, or so I told myself. He talked about a big project at his architecture firm, a skyscraper that was both a triumph and a terror. He talked about Lily's soccer practice, how she'd scored her first goal. He mentioned a leak in their roof, the mundane frustrations of homeownership. He sounded tired, yes, his voice frayed at the edges, but not cold. Not like this impenetrable wall of silence. Everything okay, sweetie? I had asked, my maternal instincts humming, a low thrum of anxiety I'd lived with my whole life. You sound worn out. There was a pause. A beat of silence that felt heavier than the usual static. It stretched for a second too long, and in it, I felt a chasm open. Just work, Mom. It's a lot right now. You know how it is. You work too hard, Michael. Just like your father. It was my standard refrain, a phrase worn smooth with use, a mixture of pride and a deep, historical concern. Robert had worked himself into an early grave, or so the doctors said. A massive heart attack at 45. One minute he was here, complaining about the price of gas. The next he was gone, leaving me with a mortgage, a mountain of unspoken worries, and a 10-year-old boy to raise alone. Yeah, Michael had said, his voice suddenly distant, detached. I guess I do. That was it. The conversation ended soon after with the usual rushed, I love yous. Was that the trigger? Was it the mention of his father? No, that couldn't be it. We'd always talked about Robert. I had made it my life's mission to ensure Michael remembered him, that he grew up revering the memory of the good, hardworking, unimpeachable man his father was. I built that memory for him, stone by polished stone, story by carefully curated story, protecting him from the harsh reality that life could be so senselessly, randomly cruel. I gave him a myth to believe in. After Robert died, I had to be both mother and father. I became a machine fueled by coffee and desperation. I worked 2 jobs. Mornings as a file clerk at a dusty law office, the smell of old paper and bitter ink filling my nostrils, and evenings waiting tables at the Greasy Spoon Diner, where the smell of fried onions and stale coffee clung to my hair and clothes long after I'd dragged myself home after midnight. I'd slip into Michael's room, a shadow in the doorway, and watch him sleeping soundly in his bed, his face so peaceful, and I'd feel a surge of fierce, desperate love that bordered on pain. Every ache in my back, every rude customer who snapped their fingers at me, every condescending boss who called me dear, it was all for him. So he would never have to know this kind of struggle. So he could have the life his father and I had dreamed of for him, a life of white collars and clean hands. I sold my wedding ring to pay for his first computer, a clunky beige box that was his window to the world. I told him it had slipped down the drain. I sold my mother's pearls, the only thing of real value I owned, to help with his college application fees. I told him I'd lost them. I took out a second mortgage on this house, the house Robert and I had poured our hearts into, to ensure he graduated from a top university without a single penny of student debt. I never told him about the specifics, the sleepless nights spent staring at the ceiling, the terror of foreclosure notices. When he'd ask how we were managing, I'd just smile, a brittle thing I practiced in the mirror, and say, your father left us well taken care of, or I'm good with money, sweetie. I didn't want him to carry the burden of my sacrifice. I wanted him to fly. And he did. He soared. He became everything I'd ever hoped for. A success. A husband. A father. And now, somehow, he was a stranger. Desperate for any answer, I swallow my pride and try calling Sarah. She's a sweet girl, a first-grade teacher with a kind heart and endless patience. She's always been the bridge between Michael's frantic, important life and my quiet one. She picks up on the third ring, and I can hear the manufactured cheer in her voice before she even speaks. Eleanor. Hi, she says, her tone a little too bright, a little too strained. I hear Lily chattering in the background, a high, happy sound that sends a pang of longing through me so sharp it makes me gasp. Sarah, honey. I'm so sorry to bother you at home. No, it's fine. Is everything all right? The question is so absurd, so profoundly ignorant of the crater in my life, that I almost laugh, a wild, unhinged sound. No, Sarah, it's not. Not at all. I haven't heard from Michael in 6 weeks. He won't answer his phone. He won't answer my messages. Is he okay? Did something happen to him? The silence on her end is a confession. Something did happen. He's just been under a lot of pressure, Eleanor. Work has been insane. It's a paper-thin excuse, and we both know it. That's what he said the last time I spoke to him. This is more than work, Sarah, and you know it. Please, just tell me. Did I do something? Did I say something to offend him? My voice cracks on the last word, the sound of my own desperation shaming me. No, it's not you, she says, and her voice softens with what sounds like genuine pity, which is almost worse than the evasion. It makes me feel small, pathetic. It's complicated. Complicated how? I press my patience, worn thin by weeks of worry, finally snapping. He is my son. If something is wrong, I have a right to know. I am his mother. I know you do, she says. And for a moment she just breathes into the phone, a shaky, uncertain sound. But this is something you need to talk to Michael about. I can't. I can't get in the middle of it. I'm sorry, Eleanor. Please don't make me. Can you at least ask him to call me? Just let him know I'm worried sick, that I love him. I will, she promises, her voice rushing now, eager to escape. I have to go, Eleanor. Lily needs help with her homework. I'll talk to him. The line goes dead. She'll talk to him, but he won't call. I know it with a certainty that chills me to the bone. This isn't about being busy. This isn't a misunderstanding. This is a wall, built brick by painstaking brick, and Sarah is guarding the gate. He's turned his own wife, that sweet girl, against me. The thought is so painful, so contrary to everything I know about the boy I raised, that I have to sit down on the bottom step of the staircase, my legs suddenly too weak to hold me. I wander upstairs, drawn to Michael's old bedroom, which I've kept just as he left it, a shrine to a boy who no longer exists. The posters of bands I never understood are still on the wall, their colors faded by 2 decades of sun. His high school track trophies gleam on the bookshelf, a small army of golden men frozen mid-stride. I run my finger over the dusty rim of one. State finals, 400 meters dash, second place. I remember that day so clearly. The smell of the freshly cut grass, the roar of the small crowd, the sharp crack of the starter pistol. He'd been disappointed with second place, devastated even, but I was so full of pride I thought my heart would burst from my chest. After the race, he was quiet, withdrawn. I'd found him sitting alone on the bleachers, his head in his hands. It's okay, honey, I'd said, wrapping an arm around his tense, muscular shoulders. You were amazing. Absolutely amazing. He'd shaken his head, not looking at me. I should have won. I let him get ahead of me on the final turn. I hesitated. You did your best. That's all anyone can ask. He looked at me then, his young face so serious, his eyes holding the weight of the world. Is it? You work so hard, Mom. All the time. I see you when you come home. You're so tired. I just want to. I want to make it all worth it. The memory stabs at me, a fresh wound. He was always so aware of my efforts, so eager to repay me with his success. So what changed? Where did that boy go, the boy who wanted to make it all worth it? Did he decide it wasn't? That I wasn't? The days blur into a monotonous, gray cycle of waiting and remembering. The silence in the house grows teeth. It chews on my sanity during the long, sleepless nights. I find myself talking to Robert's armchair, a one-sided conversation with a ghost. What would you do, Rob? You always knew how to handle him. He was your boy, through and through. You'd know what to do. But the chair just sits there, empty, its velvet worn smooth by years of profound and unending absence. My mind, against my will, keeps circling back to Robert's death. It was so sudden, so final. The police had called it a tragic accident. He'd been working late, a common occurrence, driving home on that winding country road during a vicious thunderstorm. His car had skidded on the wet asphalt, gone through the guardrail, and plunged into the ravine below. But the autopsy report, the one I had read until the words burned into my memory, said the primary cause of death was a massive coronary thrombosis. A heart attack. The stress of his demanding job, they said. He'd had the heart attack behind the wheel, which caused the crash. It was a small mercy, the kind-faced doctor had told me. He likely never felt a thing. He was gone before the impact. I remember the insurance man, a paunchy, sweating fellow named Mr. Henderson, sitting at this very dining table a week later. He'd explained the life insurance policy with a practiced, somber tone. It was substantial, more than I ever imagined. Robert had increased the coverage just 6 months before he died. He was a good man, Mrs. Miller, Henderson had said, his voice oozing professional sympathy as he slid the check across the polished wood. A good husband and father. He made sure you and the boy were provided for. I had cried then, tears of genuine grief mixed with a terrible, secret, and shameful relief. We were safe. Michael was safe. His future was secure. That check wasn't just money. It was my gospel. It was the foundation upon which I would build our new life, a life free from the struggles I'd endured. I invested it wisely, managed it with a miser's frugality, and used it to supplement the meager income from my jobs. It was the seed money for Michael's dreams. I told myself it was Robert's final gift, his last act of profound, protective love. Now, sitting in the oppressive gloom of my lonely house, a disturbing thought, a sliver of ice, worms its way into my mind. Could Michael's silence have something to do with his father? But how? He was only 10. He knows only the stories I've told him. The heroic, sanitized version of his father, the man who worked hard and loved his family above all else. I had meticulously protected him from anything that might tarnish that sacred image. I can't live like this anymore. The not knowing is a poison, and it has finally reached my heart. If he will not come to me, I will go to him. I pack an overnight bag, my hands trembling with a mixture of fear and resolve. I write a short note for my neighbor, asking her to collect my mail, the words looking shaky and unfamiliar. As I lock the front door, the solid click of the deadbolt sounds like a final, decisive act. I'm stepping out of my prison of silence and into the unknown, whatever it may hold. The 4-hour drive to the city is a blur of highway hypnosis and frantic, circling thoughts. What will I say? What if he refuses to see me? What if he looks at me with hatred in his eyes? The woman who was so certain of her son's boundless love now feels like a beggar, about to plead for scraps of affection at the door of a stranger. With every mile that disappears under my tires, the memories get more vivid, more insistent, as if the motion of the car is shaking them loose from the dark corners of my mind. I remember the day I found the envelope. It was about a week after Robert's funeral. The casseroles had stopped coming, the house was finally horribly quiet, and I had started the heartbreaking task of sorting through his desk. It felt like a violation. Tucked away in the back of a deep drawer, underneath a stack of old tax returns and faded blueprints, was a thick, sealed envelope with my name, Eleanor, written on the front in his familiar, sloping handwriting. My heart had hammered against my ribs, a wild bird trapped in my chest. I thought it was a love letter, a final goodbye he'd written for me to find. I sank to the floor of his study, the plush carpet cool against my legs, my hands shaking so badly I could barely tear it open. But it wasn't a love letter. Not in the way I had prayed it would be. My eyes scanned the pages, the words blurring through my tears, at first not making any sense. It was a confession and a plan. He wrote about his job at the engineering firm, about the immense pressure from his bosses to cut corners, to fudge numbers on a major municipal bridge project. He'd gotten in too deep, made a terrible mistake, and an external audit was coming. He was going to be exposed, arrested, disgraced. He wrote of the shame, the abject terror of facing ruin, of losing everything we had worked for. He couldn't bear the thought of Michael seeing him as a failure, a criminal. And then came the part that made the air leave my lungs in a silent scream. The life insurance is our only way out. Ellie, he'd written, the ink slightly smeared as if a tear had fallen on that very spot. The policy has a standard suicide clause. They won't pay if I take my own life. It's void for 2 years, and it's been 6 months since I increased it. But a heart attack. My father had one at 50. Dr. Evans has already warned me about my blood pressure. It has to look like an accident. I'll be driving home late on that back road. During the storm tonight, I'll take the pills I got from Mark. They'll just think my heart gave out from the stress. You have to be strong, Eleanor. You have to play the part of the grieving widow. You have to let them believe the official story. Do it for Michael. Give him the life we can no longer give him. This is my only way to fix what I've broken. Please forgive me. I love you. I'd sat there on the cold floor of his study, the letter clutched in my hand, the world collapsing around me into a silent, screaming void. It wasn't a tragic accident. It wasn't a merciless act of fate. It was a calculated, desperate act of fraud and self-destruction. And he had made me his unwilling accomplice. I had a choice, a stark and terrible one. I could go to the police, tell them the truth, hand over the letter, and we would be left with nothing but shame, scandal, and crippling debt. Or I could do as he asked. I could be strong. I could lie. For Michael. In that moment, and in every moment after, the answer was always for Michael. I burned the letter that night, standing over the kitchen sink, watching the ashes of my husband's last words curl into black, weightless fragments. I washed them down the drain, and with them, a vital part of my own soul. I made my choice. I played the part of the grieving widow with an Oscar-worthy performance. I accepted the condolences and the casseroles with a numb grace. I took the insurance check, and I dedicated my entire life to fulfilling Robert's final, terrible wish, giving Michael a perfect life built on the foundation of a perfect lie. For 32 years, I had carried that secret, a cold, heavy stone lodged permanently in my heart. Subscribe now, you won't believe the twist that's coming. I pull up to Michael's house. It's a modern masterpiece of glass and cedar and sharp angles, the kind of place featured in glossy magazines. It's beautiful, clean, and completely alien to me. It looks like a house with no secrets, no ghosts. I take a deep, shuddering breath and walk up the stone pathway to the enormous front door. I ring the bell, the chime echoing in the cavernous entryway. Sarah opens the door. The shock on her face is immediate, followed by a flicker of pure panic. "Eleanor, what are you doing here?" "I had to come," I say, my voice firmer than I feel. "I need to see him, Sarah." Now. Now is not a good time," she says, physically blocking the doorway, her hand flat against the doorjamb. He's not well. I don't care if he's well. He's my son. I'm not leaving this doorstep until I speak to him." I push past her. It's not a gentle movement. It's the shove of a desperate, cornered animal. Sarah stumbles back, her mouth agape, a small cry escaping her lips. "Mom?" The voice comes from the end of the long, art-filled hall. It's Michael. He steps out of a room that looks like a home office. He looks terrible, worse than I could have ever imagined. He's lost a startling amount of weight, his face is pale and unshaven, and his eyes, those beautiful eyes so like his father's, are hollowed out, bloodshot, and filled with a haunted, ancient pain I've never seen before. He looks like a man who has seen a ghost and realized the ghost is himself. My heart breaks all over again, shattering into dust. "Michael, honey." "Oh, sweetie, what is it? What's happened? Talk to me." I start towards him, my arms instinctively outstretched, wanting only to hold him, to fix whatever is broken. He flinches, taking a sharp step back as if my touch would be acid. The small movement is more devastating than a scream, more final than a slammed door. "Don't," he says, his voice a hoarse, grating rasp. He turns without another word and walks back into his office. I follow him, a sleepwalker drawn towards a nightmare. Sarah hovers in the doorway behind me, her hands twisting the hem of her shirt, her face a mask of sorrow. The office is in chaos. Papers are scattered everywhere, books are pulled from shelves and lying open on the floor. It looks like it's been ransacked by a storm of fury and grief. But my eyes are drawn to the one thing that is sitting neatly in the center of his large, mahogany desk, illuminated by a single desk lamp. It's an old, yellowed envelope. The one I burned in my kitchen sink 32 years ago. No, it can't be. It's impossible. I feel the blood drain from my face, a cold rush that leaves me dizzy. My breath catches in my throat. I stare at it, at the familiar, sloping handwriting that spells out my name. "Eleanor, where did you get that?" I whisper, the sound barely audible in the suddenly silent room. Michael doesn't look at me. He looks at the envelope as if it's a venomous snake. "You know, when you gave me that box of Dad's old things last year?" His watch, his cufflinks, a few of his favorite books. "You said you wanted me to have them." There was a small, rusty key in the bottom of the box. I didn't think anything of it. I just threw it in my desk drawer. He finally lifts his eyes to mine, and they are filled with an agony so profound it mirrors my own. "A few months ago, I was looking for a paperclip. I saw the key. I don't know why, but I remembered the name of the bank you used to use, the old downtown branch that closed 20 years ago. You always had a safety deposit box there. On a whim, a stupid, nagging whim, I called their corporate office. I went through the whole process, proved I was next of kin. They had the contents of your old box, drilled out and sealed. They'd been trying to contact you for years at the old address." He gestures to the letter on the desk, the source of all the destruction. "This was inside. along with another one, addressed to me. Another one, addressed to him. The room tilts violently. I grab the edge of the heavy desk to steady myself, my knuckles white. Robert had written another letter. A second confession. One for Michael. One he was never supposed to see until he was a man, and one I never, ever knew existed. What? What did it say? I choke out, the question a shard of glass in my throat. Michael's laugh is a harsh, broken, terrible sound. What did it say? Oh, it said everything, Mom. It told me everything. About the fraud at his firm. About the investigation. About his plan to die. He called himself a coward. He told me he was sorry for not being strong enough to face the consequences. And he told me that you knew. That you knew about the plan beforehand. That you would be the one to carry the lie so I could have a good life. He picks up the letter, his hand shaking with a violent tremor of rage and grief. My entire life. My education, my career, this house, this family. It's all built on this. On blood money. My father didn't die of a tragic heart attack. He killed himself because he was a criminal. And my mother. My sainted, self-sacrificing mother. You let him. You cashed the check and you lied to me. You lied to me every single day for 32 years. The words hit me like physical blows, knocking the air from my lungs. The carefully constructed world I had built for him, for us, shatters into a million irreparable pieces. The truth, the one I had buried so deep I had almost convinced myself it wasn't real, is now laid bare under the harsh, unforgiving light of my son's pain. I did it for you. The words tear from my throat in a raw, primal scream. It's the only defense I have. It's the only truth I've ever known. We would have lost everything. You would have grown up in shame and poverty. I did it so you could be somebody. What was I supposed to do? Let his shame destroy your life too? My life was already destroyed, he roars, slamming his fist on the desk, the impact rattling the ghost of that letter. It was destroyed the day he decided to do that, and the day you decided to lie about it. You didn't protect me, Mom. You poisoned me. You let me worship a hero who was a fraud. You made my whole life a lie. Every accomplishment feels dirty now. Every success feels like it was paid for with my father's cowardice. Do you have any idea what that feels like? To find out your entire existence is the result of a crime? I stare at him, at the ravaged face of the man my son has become, and for the first time, I see him not as my child, but as a person, an individual broken by the weight of my choices. The sacrifice I had framed as my greatest act of love was, in his eyes, my greatest, most unforgivable betrayal. The strength I had prided myself on for 3 decades was nothing but a long, elaborate, and ultimately selfish deception. The floor rushes up to meet me, but it's not the floor. It's just the darkness. I collapse into a nearby chair, the sound of my own ragged, hopeless sobbing filling the space between us. There are no more words. No more defenses. There is only the ugly, devastating truth, sitting on the desk between a mother and the son she has irrevocably, completely broken. Get out, he whispers, his voice suddenly devoid of all emotion. It's worse than the yelling. The emptiness is a final judgment. Just get out of my house. Sarah gently takes my arm, her face a mask of profound sorrow. She helps me to my feet, her touch the only human kindness in a room that has become a tomb. She leads me out of the office, past the happy pictures of Lily on the wall, past the evidence of the life I helped build and have now utterly destroyed. She walks me to my car in total silence. As I fumble for the door handle, she leans down, her own eyes filled with tears. He loved you, Eleanor, she says softly, her voice thick. More than anything in the world. That's why this is killing him. I drive away, not knowing where I'm going, not caring. The city lights blur into meaningless streaks of color through my tears. The love that had been the engine of my life, the very reason for my existence, had become the source of my son's deepest wound. I hadn't saved him from his father's tragedy. I had merely postponed it, amplified it, and made him an unwitting beneficiary of his father's despair and my deception. I wasn't a hero. I wasn't even just a liar. I was a ghost, haunting the very life I had tried so desperately to create. The weeks that followed were a new kind of silence. It was no longer the silence of a phone that didn't ring. That had been a silence of anxiety and hope. This was the silence of certainty, of an ending. It was the silence of a life that had lost its purpose. The house was no longer just empty. It was a mausoleum. Every object was an artifact of the lie. The photo on the mantelpiece wasn't of a proud mother and her successful son. It was a picture of a conspirator and the product of her crime. Robert's armchair wasn't a memorial to a beloved husband. It was the seat of a man who chose death and deceit over facing his own failures. I stopped calling. What was there to say? The truth was out, a gaping chasm between us that words could not bridge. I spent my days sitting in the quiet, the television off, the radio silent, finally confronting the woman I had been for 32 years. The grief for Robert, which I had performed so convincingly for so long, became real for the first time. I grieved for the desperate, terrified man he was, for the good man he couldn't be, and for the impossible, soul-crushing choice he had laid at my feet. And I grieved for myself, for the young, terrified widow who made a desperate choice in a dark kitchen, and for the old woman who was now paying the final, terrible price. I thought about selling the house, about running away from the memories that now felt poisoned. But where would I go? My entire world, my entire identity had been built around Michael. Without him, I was untethered, a ship with no anchor and no harbor, adrift on a vast, dark sea. One Tuesday afternoon, nearly 2 months after the confrontation, the mail carrier slid a thin, white envelope through the slot in my door. It fell silently onto the welcome mat. It had no return address, but I recognized the clean, architectural printing on the front immediately. It was from Michael. My hands shook so badly I could barely tear it open. My heart pounded a painful, panicked rhythm against my ribs. I expected a legal document, a letter from a lawyer, something to formally sever our ties for good. I pulled out the contents with a trembling hand. It wasn't a letter. It was a photograph, a 5x7 school picture of Lily. She was smiling, a gap-toothed grin full of pure, uncomplicated life and innocence. She had Sarah's kind eyes and Michael's determined chin. She was beautiful, a perfect creation. I turned the photo over, my fingers numb. On the back, in his familiar, sharp handwriting, were 4 simple words. She has your smile. Tears streamed down my face, hot and fast, blurring the image of my beautiful granddaughter. They were not the tears of self-pity or loneliness I had cried for months. They were tears of something else, something sharp and painful and overwhelmingly complex. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't a solution or an absolution. It was a flicker of light in a vast, profound darkness. It was an acknowledgement that beneath the toxic rubble of our shared lie, a single, unbreakable thread of biological connection remained. He saw me and his daughter. He saw the woman who existed before the secret, the mother whose smile was once just a smile, not a mask. It was not a bridge across the chasm that separated us, but it was a sign that perhaps, one day, we might learn to shout across it. I held the photograph to my chest, the smooth, cool paper a small, precious anchor in the wreckage of my life. The silence in the house remained, but for the first time in a long, long time, it didn't feel only like an ending. It felt like a beginning. A painful, uncertain, and deeply human one. Comment which part of the story left you speechless.